Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving deep into how to make your Airflow DAGs. You know, those directed acyclic graphs that orchestrate our data pipelines way more efficient.
Yeah, we're talking about squeezing out every bit of performance, right?
Absolutely. And specifically, we're tackling those pesky functions that insist on running every time the DAG refreshes, even if nothing's changed.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that so many times. It's a real performance killer. You're just wasting time and resources.
Exactly. And it just feels, well, inelegant.
Yeah, totally.
So we've got this fantastic article by Anirban Saha on Medium to guide us. He lays out the problem so clearly, and then he walks us through some really clever solutions.
And it's not just theoretical, right? He's actually implemented these techniques in production.
Exactly. He's got the real-world experience to back it up.
So where do we start with this whole function execution problem? What's the root of the evil, so to speak?
Well, Saha uses this really simple example to illustrate it. Imagine you've got a Python operator that needs a bucket name. Pretty standard stuff, right?
Yeah, I've done that a million times.
So you write a function, call it getBucketName to fetch that bucket name. The problem is, every time the DAG refreshes, that function gets called again, even if the bucket name hasn't changed.
Oh, I see. So it's like constantly checking the fridge to see if the milk magically refilled itself.
Exactly. It's inefficient and, well, kind of silly.
And I bet that happens a lot more than we realize. Like, those refreshes happen every few seconds, right?
Yeah, it can be really frequent, and Saha actually built this little Flask app to track those function calls. It's like a counter that just keeps ticking up, showing you how quickly those refreshes add up.
Oh, wow. I bet that's eye-opening to see. Like, you can really visualize the wasted effort.
Yeah, it's a real aha moment, and it makes the case for finding a better way pretty compelling. So how did he tackle this? What's like the first line of defense?
Well, he starts with SCOMs. You know, Airflow's built-in way for tasks to pass messages between each other.
Right, XComs, like little data messengers zipping around our DAGs.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea is to use an XCOM to store the result of that getBucketName function. Run it once, store the bucket name in the XCOM, and then any other task that needs it can just grab it from there.
So we're basically saying, hey, we already fetched the bucket name, no need to do it again.
Yeah, it's like leaving a note on the fridge, milk's still gone.
Perfect analogy. But I can already see a potential problem here. If we have a lot of values like this, things could get messy.
Yeah, you're right. Imagine having like hundreds of tasks, each with its own little XCOM for a simple value. It'd be a nightmare to manage.
Yeah, it wouldn't be very elegant, that's for sure. And this is where Saha introduces a much more sophisticated approach, custom macros.
Macros. That's where the real magic happens, Reese.
Tell me more. I'm intrigued. How do they solve this problem?
Okay, so imagine macros as like these little functions you define once and then sprinkle throughout your DAG.
So they're like reusable building blocks, right?
Exactly. And here's the cool part. They don't actually run every time the DAG refreshes.
Oh, so they're not constantly burning CPU cycles.
Nope. They only execute when the specific task that needs them actually runs. It's all about efficiency.
Okay, now that's starting to sound really powerful, but how does that work exactly? Is there some, like, secret sauce involved?
The secret sauce, my friend, is Jinja templating.
Jinja, isn't that like a web templating engine?
Yeah, but it's also used in Airflow, and it plays a crucial role in how these macros behave.
Okay, so break it down for me. How does Jinja make these macros so efficient?
Okay, so the macro itself, the code you write, it doesn't actually get evaluated until the task that's using it actually starts running.
So it's like a delayed reaction, almost.
Exactly. It's like having a recipe that only starts cooking when you actually turn on the oven.
Okay, that's a helpful analogy. So it's not about constantly checking if the ingredients are ready. It's about waiting for the right moment to start the process.
Exactly. And Saha's article walks us through how to do this. He shows how to use those special Jinja tags to define your macros and ensure they only run when they're supposed to.
I'm starting to see the appeal here, but I have to ask, does this actually make a difference in the real world?
Oh, absolutely. It's not just a theoretical concept. Saha implemented this in his production environment and saw some pretty impressive results.
Like, what kind of results are we talking about?
Well, first of all, he was able to drastically reduce calls to BigQuery.
BigQuery. That's a pretty common data warehouse, right?
Yeah, and it can get expensive if you're not careful about how you query it.
So by using custom macros, he was able to, like, cut down on those queries and save some money.
Precisely. And it wasn't just BigQuery. He also used this technique to optimize interactions with with a slow internal system.
So this approach can be applied to more than just external APIs, right? It's a more general way of thinking about efficiency.
Exactly. You can use it to pre-compute values, streamline interactions with slow systems, you name it.
I'm sold. But what about that specific example Saha mentioned with the data proc submit job operator? What was that all about?
Right, so he was using that operator to submit jobs to Dataproc for data processing. And the key insight here was that the job parameter, which defines the job you want to submit, well, it's templatable.
Templatable, meaning we can use our custom macros with it.
You got it. So instead of generating this potentially huge job configuration every time the tag refreshed, he just had it neatly packaged up in his macro, ready to go.
So it's like having a blueprint ready instead of having to design the building from scratch every time.
A perfect analogy. It can save a ton of time and processing power, especially when you're working with large data sets and complex data proc jobs.
This is all starting to sound pretty amazing, but I'm wondering, can we just use macros everywhere and call it a day? Are there any, limitations to this approach?
That's a great question, and it's one that Saha addresses head-on in his article. He's very clear that not all operator parameters are created equal when it comes to templating. Some parameters are, macro-friendly, others not so much.
So it's not a universal solution. There are some boundaries we need to be aware of.
Exactly. Blindly applying macros everywhere without understanding how your operators work. Well, that could lead to some unexpected behavior.
Okay, so how do we know which parameters are safe to use with macros? Is it buried somewhere in the Airflow documentation?
Thankfully, no. It's actually pretty straightforward. Saha points us to these two special parameters that every operator has: template fields and template text.
Okay, so template fields tells us which parameters are templatable and therefore macro-friendly. What about template text?
That one's more specific. It tells us which file extensions are allowed for those templated parameters, like a little compatibility check.
So it's about knowing the rules of the game before you start playing.
Precisely. And Saha even gives us some real-world examples of how to find this information in the Airflow documentation. He walks us through finding the template fields for a specific operator.
So he's not just telling us what to do, he's showing us how to do it, which is really helpful.
Exactly. He's encouraging us to be curious and to explore the documentation ourselves.
And that kind of self-discovery is the best way to learn, right?
Absolutely. And it empowers us to make more informed decisions about how we optimize our DAGs.
Yeah.
So we've seen the power of custom macros. We've seen how they can lead to real-world wins. But we've also learned that it's not a magic bullet.
Right. We need to be mindful of the limitations, do our homework, and understand how our operators work.
Exactly. So here's the big question. How can you apply these insights to your own Airflow DAGs? Are there opportunities hiding in your workflows?
That's a great question, and one we'll explore further in part 3 of our deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been geeking out about optimizing Airflow DAGs, those essential workflows that keep our data flowing smoothly.
Yeah, and specifically, we've been exploring the power of custom macros, those little code snippets that can supercharge our DAGs.
And in this final part of our deep dive, it's all about you.
Oh, yeah. It's time to take what we've learned from Anirban Saha's article and apply it to your real-world Airflow projects.
Exactly. So where do we begin? What's the first step in this macro makeover?
Well, I'd say start by taking a good look at your existing DAGs. Really scrutinize them.
Looking for those inefficient functions, right? The ones that are getting called way too often.
You got it. Are you hitting an external API every few seconds when you really only need to fetch that data once?
Or are you running a complex database query repeatedly even though the underlying data hasn't changed?
Or maybe you've got some heavy calculations happening inside your DAG that could benefit from being pre-computed.
It's almost like a game, right? Hunting for those hidden opportunities to optimize.
Exactly. And the more you look, the more you'll start to see them. It's like developing a sixth sense for efficiency.
And the rewards are worth it. Not only will your DAGs run faster and more efficiently, they'll also be easier to read and understand.
Oh yeah, readability is a huge win. Instead of having the same chunk of code copy-pasted all over the place, you've got a single, well-defined macro that does the job.
It's like decluttering your code.
Precisely.
Huh.
And as we learned from Saha, the key to unlocking this power is using those special Jinja templating tags.
Right, those tags tell Airflow to wait until the very last moment to execute the macro. It's like having a recipe that only starts cooking when you actually turn on the oven.
Great analogy. But remember, not all operator parameters are macro-friendly.
That's where those two magic parameters come in, right?
You got it. Template fields and template text, those are your guideposts to using macros safely and effectively.
So consult the Airflow documentation for your specific operators, find those parameters, and they'll tell you exactly how to use macros